Welcome to the Digital Communicators Podcast. I'm Marcus Huttenberg at Babel PR. And who are you?
I'm Joel Goodson, also of Babel PR.
And what are we doing here today?
Today we are talking about the Babel Barometer 2025. It's our latest report. And yeah, we're just going to be going through the findings, the key insights from the survey, from the report. I guess it's going to be a little bit like, do you know what Notebook LLM is?
Yeah, vaguely.
So it's an AI, shockingly, from Google, and it's used to analyze reports and big PDFs and stuff that you can't be bothered to read, essentially. And you put it in, and it gives you kind of key takeaways, notes, but it also does this kind of American AI-generated like podcast of it when they're really American and really excited, and they break down the data in like 10 minutes, and it's all, wow, this is amazing, this is a game changer. Probably didn't need to do the accent,
but what you just heard there was Joel's attempt at an American accent.
We've done it now.
Yes.
So that's what this is going to be. It's going to be our version of Notebook LLM. It's going to be slightly less American, or I'm going to be slightly less American. And hopefully, we're going to be more engaging than the AI, which is...
That's the bar. That's the bar.
That's the bar.
Human. All right.
And if it's rubbish, this will just never see the light of day, and we'll do the LLM version.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
Solid. All right. Well, why don't we start with the basics then? Why don't we start with the basics then? What is the Babel Barometer?
So the Babel Barometer is a now annual report, I suppose, because it's the second year we've done it. It's a survey of, this year at least, it's US and UK business technology decision makers, which is a long way of saying people at large companies. I think it's 1,000 employees or more who kind of hold the purse strings, make the final decisions when it comes to technology decisions, so buying new tech. It's essentially a survey of our customers' customers. It's similar to a report we do for clients all the time, but it's kind of for clients in a different way, because it's about those decisions that make the difference for buying tech. So it's going to be really useful insight for our customers, so PR managers, CMOs, that kind of stuff, and it's full of data on which kind of PR and marketing tactics really make the difference, what kind of content these people read, where they get their news from, and what they look for when trying to make a final decision on a new piece of technology or service.
And I guess there are a few key concepts that came out of the reports, and if we were to try and drill into them, what's the breakdown of the insights?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, before we get into some of the details, some key concepts that come up a few times is, one is the kind of buying cycle, or the funnel, if you will. I think that's quite a key concept when you're thinking marketing and content strategy anyway. And there's a few different ways you can slice it. Do you like tofu, Marcus?
Not particularly.
Well, luckily I'm not talking about the bean curd. It's the... do you like that? It's so top of funnel, tofu, middle of funnel, mofu, which sounds rude, and the bottom of funnel, wofu. We tend to call it awareness, consideration, and conversion. So it's basically different stages of the buying or marketing journey. People going from someone who's never heard of your brand or product right the way through to someone who's aware, is engaging with your content, and until they start looking at your service and that conversion phase, and eventually, hopefully, decide to use the product or solution. And that's a key concept in this report, because we go through those stages and what kind of PR and marketing tactics really make the difference at each step. And the other thing that comes up a little bit is the 95-5 rule. I don't know if you're aware of it.
Well, as it happens, I have read the report, so I do now.
But I'm going to explain it anyway. So the 95-5 rule is the idea that of your audience, your kind of target buying group, only 5% of them are ever in a position to actually buy a solution, technology, whatever it is, at any given time. So B2B buying cycles are quite long anyway, but tech isn't something particularly in, I guess, the B2B world. There are some, easy over-the-top stuff where you can do on a demo basis, but some of it is a bit more of a decision. There's a lot of different people that have to go into making the decision. That we've got data on that as well. We're not going to talk about that today, but that's also in the report, kind of who makes those decisions. And so the 95-5 rule is essentially only 5% of your target audience are ever kind of in that conversion stage at any point. And everyone else is not quite ready to buy. So that's where awareness content, consideration content, PR marketing, kind of that stuff is really important. It's kind of engaging the 95%. So it's a thing that comes up.
Yeah, I guess what we find when we work with a lot of vendors, but even the companies I worked at in-house before joining Babel, there's this tendency to always want to push in a kind of self-serving way what you're doing, but just actually seeing that 5% stat puts into perspective just how few people are actually looking for your solution at this present time. So what's the point really?
Yeah, and it's understandable, right? I think any business, but even kind of marketing teams, their end goal is to generate leads, to generate revenue, right? So it's natural to want to focus on those areas. But it's a funnel for a reason. It's kind of a upside down triangle, I suppose. So it's much heavier at the top. There's more people at the top, and it filters down. So if you just start at that bottom stage, first of all, no one's going to have found you, no one's going to have heard of you, but also, there's a much bigger opportunity to speak to more people, to capture more people at the top and kind of work them through. You have to do it all, but it's natural, I think, why companies sometimes want to focus on the end result, but you've got to go through the process. I think the other thing that is relevant when we're talking about the 95-5 rule is, and I'm throwing a lot of numbers around, we haven't actually got into the report yet, it's called the rule of 3 in purchase decisions. So it's essentially the idea that when you think of a kind of service or a space, you tend to kind of recall 3 brands that you might have heard of in that space. And I don't know the exact numbers, but studies show that more often than not, I think it's like 75% of the time, 85% of the time, you end up purchasing from one of those top 3. The 3 that you think of initially. So that kind of mental availability is really, really important. So when we've got those 95% of purchasers, as soon as they are kind of ready to use a solution, to pick a solution, you want to be in that kind of mental availability. You want to be one of those first 3. So that brand awareness is really important. I always think of an example of it's a content marketing company that used to do these really good newsletters, and it was content around like content marketing, marketing services, really good newsletters. The branding was incredible. The content was really, really useful. Ask me what that company is called.
What was that company called?
I've got no idea. And the reason for that is the newsletter stopped. I don't know what reason. Maybe the company might have gone under, or maybe the marketing person changed, but the content stopped, so I stopped seeing it, and now I can't remember what they are. So if you ask me kind of to name content marketing companies, I'd be naming like Neil Patel, HubSpot, that kind of stuff. At the time, that one probably would have shown up, and I would have been much more likely to use their services. So that consistency is so important. You have to be memorable, I suppose.
So I guess on that point, if people only remember 3 brands in their head, how the hell do you actually come across as memorable? Like, what makes a brand memorable then?
It's an interesting one. And I think, we always want to do creative things and have really smart kind of campaign ideas and stuff that, literally is memorable, that sticks in the mind. But I think the more important thing, but also the easier thing, is just to be there, to be consistent. We've used that consistency word a few times. It's like being a good boyfriend, partner, family member, friend, is just be there. You don't have to be perfect all the time, but if you're just there, you're going to be memorable. I know we kind of talked about that example of that content marketing company. It's that consistency. The content was really good, but as soon as that consistency dropped away, then so did the kind of availability in my head. So I think consistency is the most important thing. I've said that word a little bit too consistently, but hopefully...
You might even say that you were consistent in your use of the word
joke.
Consistently. Yes.
Yep.
So if we then dive into the actual specific findings, what's the first one you want to talk about?
The first one I want to talk about, and I guess I'm going in a slightly different order to the way it's presented in the report, but we talked about that marketing funnel, right? So I'm going to follow it down that way. So starting at that awareness stage, and we are a PR agency, so I think news coverage, media is super important to us. So that was where we focused on the awareness stage, but there are other tactics there that are really relevant, SEO, organic social, that kind of stuff. But we talked about media coverage in the news. So we asked, where do tech buyers kind of regularly consume news from? And I guess this one is a little bit more relevant for you, Marcus, being more of an out-and-out kind of PR professional. And I know you have read the report, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. Where would you, even I guess before reading the report, if I was going to ask you, where do you think kind of tech buyers are getting their news from, what would you have said? Would you have got it the right answer? I feel like you would have.
Well, I'd like to think I would get the answer right, even without having read the report. But I'm going to take the wild stab and guess that it's the business press and trade media that are the most useful ones to get into.
Yep. This guy knows. I think we did do this report last year, and that finding was quite consistent, which is good, right? And I think, for B2B tech, it hopefully shouldn't be surprising that trade and business trade media rather, is super important. But I guess I'm going to put the question to you, Marcus, is why do you think that is? Because like I say, you're more of an expert.
I think there's a big distinction between getting into national media and the trade press, and that's when you're going for trades. What you're really doing is you're going for a very targeted approach. You're going for a very tailored readership, which is, if you're going for a tech trade like your IT Pro or your Computer Weekly, I mean, a lot of the people in that readership, you're going for IT managers. Those are the people who read that. If those are the people that you're trying to speak to as a business, that makes a lot more sense than going to your BBCs or your FTs. And that's not to say that they don't have merit. It's just a different purpose for why are you going to a BBC. You might be doing that for to maximize your visibility and brand awareness. That has its merit, but just know why you're doing it. It's not quite the same as going for a trade.
Yeah, and I think it kind of comes across elsewhere in the report, but B2B audiences, they want details, right? And I think that's what trade media does so well. I think it's a slide from one of our media relations training sessions on the difference between national and trade media, and it's nationals are focusing on the what and I guess the when sometimes, and the trade media is about the how and the why. And I think, kind of tech decision makers, this audience, B2B audience, are much more interested in the details. And that does come up a little bit later in the types of content we see them engaging with, is they want that more detailed content, which I think trade media does deliver.
Are there any other interesting insights that came out about where people get their news from?
Yeah, definitely. I think tech vertical trade media is the top one, but the other thing that was interesting was YouTube outperforming LinkedIn. Only just.
Oh, really?
Yeah, really interesting.
I didn't know that.
No, and it's something I think I'm keen to investigate a little bit more about exactly where the kind of key players are there. The other thing was podcasts did quite well. We actually had a separate point about podcasting, but it was a separate question on just how popular podcasts are with this like tech decision maker audience, specifically podcasts on technology and kind of business. And it was 95% of people surveyed listen to a podcast around technology, business issues, that kind of stuff, which is super high, and I guess the appropriate format.
So as far as the types of content that people like to engage with, what did we find in the report?
Yeah, so I think that was a super interesting part of the report, probably my favorite actually from a kind of content perspective, and I think you'll appreciate it as well. So the question was kind of thinking on the types of B2B tech media the audience consume, what kind of stuff are they most likely to engage and read with. And the number one was the humble byline. Which I'm sure you're all happy to hear.
Know a few things about those, yes.
But I think it's good to see, right? Because I think sometimes in your darkest days, you're writing another byline for a client, and you do wonder, what's this all about? What's it for? Is this going to move the needle? Does this matter? And it really does. I think it's a super impactful form of content. It's clearly something that the audience kind of want. And I think it also talks to what we were talking about before, is they want details, right? They want, it was specifically long form thought leadership, which was, at least 800 words. So I think a standard or slightly longer byline, which that was also interesting, because I think you see everything now with media getting shorter and shorter. But when it comes to kind of B2B business audiences, they want details. They want kind of in depth. And I think that's what is great about contributed articles. They want kind of business leaders, thought leaders to really kind of step in and share their experiences and opinions. So yeah, it was great to see that.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're quite proud on our end too. That I mean, all the bylines we do they're not really ours when you think about it. They're sourced directly from the spokesperson. I mean, we jump on download calls with them, and it's kind of a way for us to probe their brains. And obviously, I guess the stats that we're coming across in our report show that people do value that.
Yeah, 100%. I think the second most popular one, I think also was a good one to see, was news, but specifically kind of research data-based news. And that is something we do an awful lot of here at Babel. A lot of kind of reports, a bit like this one, I guess, that we've done with Censuswide. A lot of either unique data or kind of survey data. And you hear this word thrown around a little bit in recent years, kind of data fatigue, right? Or survey fatigue. That are we doing too much of this stuff? Is it getting a bit stale? But it does seem like the audience really value this kind of stuff. It is what they engage with and read, and we do still consistently see pretty good results based on campaigns around this kind of stuff, around data. And it's also, some of the stuff in here does play together really well. So some of the stuff in here does really play together well. So if you have a campaign based on unique data, you could do a white paper on it, which is obviously what the barometer is. It's also number 5 on the list of content that this audience engages with. And then you can do a lot of kind of nuanced thought leadership pitching articles based on those findings. So it all does play together.
I also think there is something to be said. I mean, we found this in the report as well, but the exec profiles commentary, and I think the one that interests me the most is white papers are of particular interest to readers, and I think it's a good litmus test of that actually working is when we speak to our clients. Frequently, they'll ask about what are the trends for. I'm trying to speak to sales prospects about this technology that we're selling in this category or what have you, and they can't necessarily find a report, even from some of the bigger analyst firms, that actually cover the category that they're in. So I think that's the sort of area where white papers, I think, do get popular because they speak to that curiosity about trends that are happening in a space that a lot of technology vendors might share.
Yeah, especially when they're based on data. So it does play with the kind of research-based news. I think that's often how we'd run that kind of campaign is collect that data, do a full kind of report. I mean, exactly like we've done with the barometer, right? Do a full report, break down other findings, but also do some press releases, some news announcements. And I think, especially more recently, the other thing that we're seeing a lot of value in, or I think there will be a lot of value in for that unique data, is, I guess, AI-based SEO, right? So SEO is going through quite a lot of change at the moment with kind of large language models, tools like ChatGPT and DeepSeek kind of taking some of that, a particularly top of funnel like organic search queries is going through a lot of change. And now we're seeing kind of AI SEO emerge, right? And that's when a kind of response on something like a ChatGPT or a DeepSeek will directly link to a brand as a source. And that's where unique data is super, super important. So AI SEO is quite a new thing. I think people are still figuring it out, but I think unique data points is going to be a really big part of that. If you ask ChatGPT a question, it more and more often it backs it up with data, and it'll trawl the internet for that. So if you've got unique data points, it will use that and source back to your company. So I think it's a really important thing if you're trying to figure out how to kind of appear in AI queries, AI search terms. I think unique data is the best place to start.
But then you also have the channels that affect tech buyers' purchasing decisions. So I guess the natural question to jump to next is, what are the channels that buyers turn to?
Yeah, so I guess when you've got that 5%, the audience that are actively sourcing and thinking about new solutions, right? And like we talked about before, it really helps when they're aware of you first. We do have a data point elsewhere in the report about where people look if a new vendor that they've never heard of approaches them. It's quite similar to the data we're going to talk about here, but this one's, it's what channels would you look for when kind of trying to decide whether to pick a vendor. So the assumption there is you've already heard of the vendor, right? This is you're scoping vendor 1, 2, 3, whatever it is. But we did have a separate question on if one you've never heard of approaches you, where would you look? It's kind of similar. And these formats are different. It's the marketing funnel, right? So we've kind of talked about there being the importance of media coverage, that kind of stuff, the importance of kind of detailed, more thought leadership-based content. But when we're in that conversion phase, it is a little bit different. The number one that came up, maybe unsurprisingly, was the company website, right? I think that makes sense. That's kind of what the website is for. It's more conversion-based, and it's to kind of get all the main details about the product, what it does, the pricing, all that kind of stuff. The other two that came up, and they did last year when we did this report, I think it was the main finding, was kind of third-party reports. So analyst reports and industry reports are seen as a real kind of source of trust and truth, I suppose. So appearing in those, is really, really valuable. And I guess probably another one that's maybe more your expertise, Marcus, because appearing in those reports all comes down to analyst relations, right?
Yeah, I think there are lots. It's clear there are a lot of channels that companies shouldn't skimp on, and analyst relations is 100% a big one, I think, to focus on, because ultimately they're the ones covering these trends for all these different technology categories across the industry, and periodically they will do reports. And I guess in the telco space we see a lot that you have these Gartner and Collider reports on who's performing the best in, for example, 5G development. So that's how you find out about a lot of these vendors, and I think being on their radar is 100% worth it. But I suppose there are other avenues too, that because I did see that in the report we found that there's quite a bit of value too in the vertical space as well. Vertical outlets that cover that niche of, for example, finance or healthcare. Not everyone works in those spaces, but some of the companies that we work with, they have customers in those spaces as well. And it kind of speaks to that earlier point again of that targeted approach of engaging with, knowing who the readership is of the outlet that you're engaging with, and that applies just as much to verticals.
Yeah, 100%. But I think the other thing, the other kind of keyword that I think is really important here when we're talking about those conversion-based decisions, the content that makes a difference at this layer is, we talked about consistency a lot. I think here the keyword is credibility, right? I think company website is absolutely fine to be a little bit more, promotional. You're trying to sell the product, and that's absolutely fine. But I think there's heaps of information there that the audience are going to look for. But when it comes to those reports, the analyst reports, the industry reports, they want a bit of kind of credibility. So I think, appearing in those is really important. The other thing that came up fairly high was just word of mouth. And I think it makes sense, right? If you're thinking in your personal life of what streaming service to use, or I don't know what VPN you should be using, or anything like that, you're going to ask your mates. And I think word of mouth in the B2B space is just as powerful. If you're asking someone who works at a different company, a peer, whatever, what do you think of these guys? Or we need a solution or service for this. Those word of mouth recommendations for people they trust are going to be really, really valuable.
And I guess when word of mouth is a factor, word of mouth doesn't spread through jargon, right? You don't have. I think my favorite example of someone ranting about business tech jargon recently was at one of the IT Pro events that some of us at Babel went to. And they had the Snowflake field CTO on there, and he's really great. I love the way that he comes across, and he was just doing this analogy about toilet paper, that you wouldn't walk into a Sainsbury's or whatever and hear someone talking about how in this hyper-competitive landscape, company XYZ has launched its innovative, highly fiber-optimized, clog-resistant solution offering cross-functional value and universal dispenser compatibility. You can see that I'm using AI I'm taking liberties with what he said, but I'm using Perplexity to fill in the gaps, and that this will somehow elevate the end user experience to the next level. Nobody really talks that way about.
I would buy that toilet paper.
I mean,
if you're a toilet paper brand, there's a gap in the market there.
Yes, I think that is probably the best toilet paper on the market. If that doesn't make you want to buy it, I don't know what will. But yeah, I guess the point is that's not how people talk about everyday goods. Why does B2B tech need to be different? And actually, he was a good example of this because the way he talked, their obvious USP is consolidating data. He was making this point about how, in the age of AI, you can't have AI without data, but you also can't have good AI without good data. And so the whole point literally just comes down to two words: consolidate data. Anyone can understand that concept. I'm sure if you deep dive into their website and their service pages, I'm sure it gets way more technical. But for the purpose of speaking to the media, speaking to any external stakeholders, just two words to define what it is that you do. And not everyone can do that.
I think clarity is so important. And the number one channel on this list, right, for those conversions is the website. And so that one is the place to get the messaging right, to convert, to get the messaging right. And I think so often we see tech brands, particularly in more kind of, let me do that again. I think so often we see tech brands focus on, the technical details, I guess, the solutions, the features, the benefits. And I think we find websites, companies that convert better really go a little bit beyond that, up the benefits ladder and talk directly to the customers, talk about the customer benefit, what it'll do for them, rather than focusing on the numbers and some of the kind of technical features of the product. So yeah, I think, to use another C word, clarity is really important, having like a clear, concise message.
So are there any other final thoughts, I guess, on the report as we draw to an end?
Yeah, I guess to summarize, because it's come up a few times, I've been throwing a few little C words around, which sounds ruder than it actually is. But there's things that come up through the report, and if we're just trying to come across with key takeaways, so what do I do with this information? I think there's 3 C's, right? So it's consistency, being consistent with the message across the channels you need to appear on, turning up, but also having the right message across those channels. There's a data point here which I don't actually think we've covered about how important it is to be consistent across all these different channels. I think it was something around 76% said it does affect how likely they are to kind of engage with or use a brand if they're being inconsistent across channels, if they're kind of talking about one thing in the media, but when you go to their website, it's like completely different. That's going to throw people off. So it's about having that kind of consistent user journey, I suppose. The other thing is credibility. Some channels for that are better than others. For your website, you're allowed to be a bit more promotional, but I think those more credible channels like analysts, media, earned coverage essentially are really, really important. I think you can't do everything owned and paid. I think getting that earned coverage is really, really important, especially when it comes to kind of building brand trust and converting. And I think, for a PR agency, that's kind of what we do, right? It's earned media, getting brands in those credible kind of channels, credible sources. And the last one we touched on a little bit is just clarity, right? So having a clear message, particularly when it comes down to that conversion stages for the website in particular, but also I think when dealing with analysts, it's just being clear and concise on what the service is, what the offering is, that kind of thing.
And the memorable piece as well, I guess. I mean, that's something that if there's one thing I think that AI has maybe unintentionally maybe had a positive impact. You see a lot of journalists complaining about how generic AI has made a lot of the written commentary that comes across, and that's 100% a truth. There's a lot of generic stuff, but there is generic B2B speak before as well. I think this is AI has sort of just put the extra pressure on everyone to be a bit more original with what they're saying, to have a little bit more pizzazz and a bit more backbone in what they're saying.
100%.
Putting more detail in it.
Yeah,
too.
Because I think detail, insight has come up again and again in here. But yeah, so true. you can be really consistent, but you also have to be kind of good, right? Because you can be so consistent with AI. You see, it's kind of my pet peeve at the moment is a lot of kind of LinkedIn AI bot kind of comments. And those are so consistent, right? Unfortunately, but they get everywhere. I think in theory, it's good for like your visibility or engagement, but it just adds absolutely no value. And I don't think people really. I hopefully that trend dies a death because I just don't see where you see that comment that just the one I'm talking about that kind of repeats the post back to you. Yeah. It's like maybe we'll get one on this. I don't know if it blows up, but I mean, great conversation on the top trends in tech. Really insightful. Thanks. Like, great. Less of that, please.
As someone who builds computers, I guess, as a hobby, I follow NVIDIA quite a bit because I buy their GPUs, and their CEO, naturally, these days, he's also in the B2B space and the enterprise space. And you look at what the things that he says, he's not telling people, oh, buy our GPUs because they're this good and have this much performance gain. I mean, they do talk about that 100% at their keynotes and in the press releases on their website. But you look at the kind of things that make the headlines. In Fortune this week, he said everyone should have an AI tutor ASAP, and that's an eyebrow-raising comment. But he's made other controversial claims in the past that have made the rounds in the media, like, you probably don't want to learn to code because that job's going to go away. AI is going to do that. And I'm oversimplifying what he's saying there. But those sort of controversial statements that get debate sparked, basically, and flowing, that's the mark of a good thought leader. And, Jensen's 100% a good example of that. So, to sum it up, there's a lot of generic product speak, and it doesn't have to be.
Don't be boring.
Don't be
That's
boring.
Fundamentally what we're trying to say. And I don't think we have a data point on that, but maybe next year. That's a question we can ask.
Maybe next year, yeah.
Do you prefer content that's boring or not boring?
I'd like to think I have an answer to that, yeah. Were we boring? Why don't you let us know? I think we're done now.
Let us know in the comments. Like, subscribe, share it with your mum.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you very much, Joel, for joining me. And
pleasure.
Thank you to all of you for listening in. And we will see you on the next episode of the Digital Communicators Podcast. Thank you. Bye-bye.